Hola, bona tarda.
Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this new edition of the Cosmograph Cycle. This year, in the 6th edition, this is devoted to women and especially to women who transform the world. As we will be talking about spirituality and religion, we will talk about the inner world and the outer world. And we will do that with 3 women. And I will introduce them in a second. I think that we can celebrate to have a panel with 4 women here because historically women, or the people who have given a voice or who were considered to be representative of many sectors, especially also the sector of religion and spirituality, were the voices of men. So I think that just the fact of having 4 women on the stage is a sign of change. And without further ado, we will start with the first part of a talk, and then we will have a little bit of time for comments and questions from the floor in case you would like to share your experience or ask questions to the speakers. And I would like now to give the floor to these 3 women. We have Laia de Ahumada, María del Mar, Albajar y Viñas, and Jenabou Dembaga. Laia de Ahumada has a PhD in Catalan philology, and she's a writer. She has promoted 2 centers, Centre Obert Eura and Terra Franca. As a writer, she works on topics that have to do with the inner world and human qualities. As a researcher, she focuses on modern time feminine writing, and in the social field, she is involved in improving the situation of women. Welcome, and thanks for being here. María del Mar Albajar y Viñas is the abbess of the Monastery of Sant Benet de Montserrat since 2015. When she was young, she started to study music, and then she studied economics at the University of Barcelona. Once at the monastery, she studied religious sciences, and she also got a theology degree in Berkeley in the United States, and she is trainer in focusing. Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Abbess. And Jenabou Dembaga is a sociologist. She's also an editor at the magazine Contextos. She's also a member of Umbrales Umma and Diabi, soninké, and she's involved in many social causes related to racism, Islamophobia, feminism, and everything that has to do with communities of African and Black descent in Catalonia, especially in everything that has to do with gender and spirituality. The 3 of them consider themselves spiritual women from different perspectives. If I'm not mistaken, María del Mar within the Catholic world, Jenabou as part of the Islamic world, and Laia, she is spiritual without a specific religious framework. And as any spiritual path is an inner path of transformation, if we talk about women and transformation, I think it is unavoidable to start by asking you, what was your process of construction, of inner construction in spiritual terms? And we would like to start with Mother Abbess. I have heard in some interviews that you explained that you had some patterns and you had a future that apparently had to do with finishing your degree and starting working in a business, in a company, but there was something related to spirituality that made you change tack. I don't know if you would like to tell us about that. Yes, it changed plans. Since I was a teenager, I defined myself as a naturally spiritual or religious. For me, God was no invention. It was something that I experienced myself. But during my teenage years, I found a religion that made it very difficult for me to be myself. The Catholic religion that I found made it difficult to be myself, to be a woman and to be friend and to be Catholic. That seemed impossible to me. So I left aside this part and I became an adult without God and without religion, because I included God in a religion, although God and religion are not synonyms, let me say that. I tried to build a persona, the persona I thought I wanted to be, and I thought that if I broke away with the tradition that I had received, I would be able to do what I really wanted. However, what happened at a point in time, well, actually three things happened, and they had a big influence. First of all, I finished my degree earlier than I expected. I thought that I would have to study in the summer, and I didn't need to. So I had this summer where I slowed down. I was very hectic, and that summer I slowed down, and I met someone who related to me in a very different way. That person looked at me taking into account who I was and even parts of myself that I had forgotten. And I also took up on a book that talked about the fact that within persons there is an inner core of silence surrounded by noise. So this quality relation, this slowing down, and this book brought down the persona that I thought that I wanted to be. Everything tumbled down, and I realized that I was finding my simpler, real and natural self, and I detected this desire to live focusing on transcendence and this quest for the absolute. Some people call it absence, presence, God. People call it different things. And I realized that I needed my life to be focused on that. And out of this experience, what I learned from that situation is that we cannot really invent ourselves. We cannot do what we want to do. We have endless possibilities as long as we listen to ourselves and welcome and embrace who we are. If I am able to embrace and listen to who I am and validate who I am, then I realize that I have endless possibilities of creation and of action. But if I had followed the direction that I had taken, I was acting violently against myself. And if I don't treat myself well, if I do violence against myself, I'm also doing violence against the others and against nature and against any transcendent reality. And this is what happened. So I ended up at the Benet de Montserrat Monastery. That was the result of all of it. And there, at that monastery, I started the process of reconciliation with myself and acceptance of my own truth and recognition of my roots and so on. That's the way it went. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. Jenabou, in your case, you come from a Muslim family, although Islam is not the majority religion in the ethnic group that you belong to. How did you experience that? What was your inner process? I grew up in a Muslim family, and I had a rather tense relationship. Let me put it that way. I also need to bear in mind that the relationship I had with religion was tense because religion was an identity element. And I'm sorry, because I'm moving from Spanish to Catalan and back to Spanish. So the fact is, my relationship with spirituality was quite, well, pushing it aside, at least at the start. And everything that had to do with racism and Islamophobia, or being born in a context that made you feel different in itself, all these things, all these axes of oppression that we build up and that, in a way, shape our identity, help us build our own identity, at the start pushed me away from Islam. However, later, in my teenage years, I realized that I had a teacher at the mosque. It wasn't a man who was teaching me Quran, it was a woman who taught me Quran. And then this woman, showed all the role models that they don't tell you about. Salam, Aisha, Hadisa, and she started from the beginnings of Islam, because when people talk about Islam, they talk about abbess and Binal, and people talk about the men in Islam, but there were women too. Aisha, for instance, she has been made invisible, but Aisha is fundamental in within Muslim communities, and she's a role model because from Aisha, Aisha had many disciples who were poets and imams. She was a wise woman. She was an erudite and a scholar, and she was kicked out from the mosque because that's what men did. But my idea to embrace, my opportunity to embrace Islam in a different way was because the women I had around me taught me to look at Islam from the point of view of women. And that's where I am, with this anti-racist activism and with feminism all the way up and all of that. Thank you. Laia, in your case, you come from, can we say that? Well, I'll say it. You are a descendant of Saint Teresa, right? But it hasn't been proven. It hasn't been proven, but I feel her very close to me. She's a little bit crazy, just like myself. I come from a Christian family, and my experience started when I didn't even have enough words to explain my experience to myself. But even without words and without the possibility to explain things, I was taken aback by certainties and not by beliefs. And the differences between what I felt and what I was supposed to believe was so big that I didn't believe. And that was, I was lucky because it spared me many problems. Maybe I believed a single thing. Love one another in the same way I loved you. And I believe that because I was lucky to be surrounded by people who put that into practice. It is true that at some point in time in my life, I had the need of religion to explain what I was experiencing and to ritualize and especially to share. But fortunately, I went on without believing the dogmas and the rules. And for a very long and fecund and fruitful time, I was able to put words into what I felt, and it allowed me to find people with whom I could share my social concerns, as well as the silence and the prayers. At some point, I realized that I had to move on. I had to continue walking. I had to leave my motherly home to continue walking because the dress I was in didn't fit me anymore. It had become too small. So again, outdoors with the experience beating in my heart, I looked for new vehicles to express myself. Christian mystical texts led me to discover other traditions, other meditation practices like as yoga, vipassana, Zen, or the heart prayer. And this was a map without roads. And along with Paniker, I went into the concept of Advaita, which is introduced in the mystical texts, but it's not very well known in Christianism because it escapes the subjection of intermediaries. And this allowed me to give a voice to what I felt. And that allowed me to go into a spirituality without the need of any religious framework, although texts and religious musics are also with me. I feel Christian, just like I feel Catalan and the daughter of my parents. Not everything that I learned when I was young was useful for me, but I took here and there things that shaped me. And I continue looking at the maps of all traditions as long as they drive me towards the essences, the essential things. I feel profoundly Christian when we talk about love, compassion, others, and putting the person at the center. I follow the religion of love as the Sufi mystic Ibn Arabi said, "My heart has become the receptacle of all religious forms." It's a field of animals. It's a cloister for Christian monks, the temple for idols, the Kaaba for pilgrims, tables of the law, and the prayers in Al-Quran. I follow the religion of love. Wherever the camels of love go, that's where my religion is. I'm a writer. I'm really sorry, I told Maria del Mar. I like saying what I really want to say, and I am not, I'm a writer. Well, after having heard this, it's really sad to have to talk because we would need to digest it, but I think we need to move on. It is true that all these experiences, these personal experiences that you have mentioned, are all extremely intimate and extremely powerful. All these experiences probably, as you have all lived in a patriarchal society, were probably not taken into account, and they have not surfaced in the spiritual or religious spaces too much. I don't know if these experiences that you have felt as women, these probably unrecognized experiences, have they led you to create a stronger feeling of community within your spiritual groups as a Muslim woman, as a Catholic woman, or in your case, as a woman in the spiritual circles that you experience? Would you believe that this inner transformation that you have followed has been in a way neglected, and has this led to create a stronger sense of community with other women? And how do we cultivate, how do we build this sense of community? How can we create a stronger community? For instance, for you, Jenabou, whenever you talk about community, you always associate that to a word that is becoming more and more common in our vocabulary: intersectionality. I don't know if you would like to talk about that, and if you could tell us a bit more about the links between community and intersectionality in your case. Intersectionality, I don't know if you know what this is about. Intersectionality is a theory, and it's also a tool for analysis. I had the goal of visibilizing religions. This word was coined by women of African descent because they realized that the policies in America were not enough to explain the reality, or those policies did not provide any answers to their reality. On the one hand, they had feminism, the different feminisms that didn't take them into account because they were women and black. And they also had the colonial and racial theories of men who didn't take them into account because they were women, and they were sort of like locked in some niche professions in the 1970s and so on. And that's how intersectionality came about. Depending on the groups that we are part of, we are in one place or a different place of the social scale. And this includes us all, because sometimes when people talk about intersectionality, they don't seem to be included. Well, whites are also included in intersectionality, and I also use intersectionality a lot because it helps me make religious discrimination more visible, because discrimination for religious reasons is also gender biased. We should not believe that women who are religious are hit the hardest in public spaces. And in the case of Muslim women, they have created strategies to empower themselves and to give tools to their communities. And I don't know if I'm drifting away from your question somehow, but I think that intersectionality for women, religious women, place us women at the center. And intersectionality prevents that certain trends, certain currents. Well, we always believe that women have always had this image of being passive. That's part of the image that patriarchy conveys, because we cannot deny that we live in patriarchal societies. But women have always been historical agents of change in the societies they were part of. For instance, yourself. Here in Catalonia, there have been women and groups of women who have changed society. So excluding women, religious women, women who believe, would be silly. Even if they live in patriarchal societies, women with religious feelings are part of society and they change society. So I link up to this idea of intersectionality because it helps make visible. They show this intersectionality tells us about the discrimination of being a woman with religious feelings, because they are discriminated against, for instance, in terms of the veil in Islam or Muslim women. This is not something that I say. Institutions say that. These are data that are available. You can check that in the internet. You don't need to go any further. But you don't need to go to one of these private databases. You don't even need to pay for this. But this discrimination, which is a result of the patriarchic society, but is also a result of many other factors, if this is added to spirituality, it has led these women to create strategies to empower themselves and to protect themselves in these contexts. For instance, in our context, women, in our contexts here, Muslim women, black Muslim women from Senegal and from Gambia have created assistance strategies. And when someone is a newcomer, when a woman arrives here, they show them around in the sense that, well, they tell them, this is, your primary healthcare center, you should go here or there, and they help her in the different tasks that she will need to carry out. So let's forget about this paternalistic image of women who believe, because really, regardless of the patriarchal role that they have had in these societies, these women have been able and are able and will be able to change things, and we are agents for historic transformation. That's all. I will not dwell into this any longer. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenabou. Laia, in your case, what was your process of community construction within your field of spirituality, and what was the transforming role that you had as a woman there? At some point in time, I was part of a community, a religious community, my parish. But I still feel part of a community. I do not agree when people say that spirituality is something individualistic. This is very proven. And with my book, Spirituals Without Religions, I didn't find in those experiences any kind of individualism, but rather a communion, the communion that I feel. And that is summarized into 3 verbs: sharing, collaborating, and cooperating. This sounds like, I don't know, some kind of marketing. These 3 verbs, sharing, collaborating, and cooperating, are basic for me, and they are also community. They create community, and they have to do with accompanying people, working with groups, sharing thoughts, doing talks, meditation, doing social work. Recently, I am working on a social orchard with people, with homeless people and volunteers, and all together we're trying to create a natural space that will improve people's lives. And we need to think about that, because very often it is considered that religions are much more community-based, and that's not always the case, because really when I have meetings within religions, you realize how patriarchal thoughts are so entrained and entrenched, and all these fights take up a lot of energy. I was very lucky because I never felt despised for being a woman. The only comment that I received in my life was at a conference when someone from the parish told me, without any, not despisingly, but with admiration, he said he couldn't imagine that a woman could be so smart. But he said that in such a way that I thought, okay, this is more than enough. My talk was well worth it. Thank you very much, Laia. Mother Abbess, you explained that you felt at some point that religion was a constraint in your case. However, you ended up living in a community, in a religious community, and I believe that you are living this with a sort of, wholeness. How was this? Tell us more about that. With plenitude. And I also believe that the Benediction nuns community has not always felt very comfortable, or it has not accepted certain aspects of the church. And these Benedictine nuns are changing the church from the inside, the community from the inside. Could you tell us more about this? Well, let's see. I was listening to them both, and I remember that when I arrived to Sant Benet Monastery, I had the stereotype of a nun, and I felt that I had to follow this path, but I thought that I was getting involved in a group of women who had nothing else to do in life, and who the only thing they could do in life was to lock themselves up at a monastery, and that they were, these sad women, so to call them that way. And I was thinking, I don't want to be that kind of a woman, but I want to be a nun. I am here with Maria Regina. I realized that I was joining a community full of women with an amazing personality, with the intelligence and the choices that they had made that were amazing in themselves. That these were women who had a very conscious itinerary in their lives, who had made this choice for faith and for religion. And you asked me about my own personal itinerary. My journey was a sort of a personal battle. It wasn't easy for me because I always had this sort of call, this deep desire that goes beyond your own will. And I was reluctant. I was reluctant to listen to that voice because I didn't want to give it that shape. I wanted to sort this out in a different way with dialogue. By opening up to my own reality, I ended up becoming a nun all these years. At the monastery, we believe in a community which is all made up by women, and that's an advantage because there are no gender differences there. That's a plus. And this community has a very wise set of rules that come from the 6th century. It was at the end of the Roman Empire. It was a period that was similar to ours. This was the tumbling down, also the collapse of an empire. It was a time of turbulence and a lot of violence, and it wasn't clear what would come later. Benedict was a Roman citizen, and in Roman times, citizens, well, only there were citizens, only male, because women were not citizens, and then there were the slaves and the barbarians coming from the north. And Benedict created a community saying that, well, they would follow the community order. So if a person arrives one day at 9 o'clock in the morning, he will be ahead of those that come at 11 p.m. And it doesn't matter if that person is a slave, a Roman, or a barbarian. At that time, these were recognized social differences. At the moment, we don't have them established or recognized, but these differences exist in all cases. And he wanted to create a community where the basis is, well, first is the first one to arrive. It doesn't matter if you are bigger or smaller, younger or older, richer or poorer, and love each other, love one another. Well, that was, as Laia said, we have been updating this. The servers of the kitchen, they need to serve one another without excuses. All need to serve one another. Kitchen meant, for instance, fetching water and logging trees for wood and so on. And he said, some people are weaker. That's what Benedict said. In all societies, some people are weaker than others. And for those, what we will do, we will turn them into assistants. There could be some kind of despise or punishment. Those should not work. They are weaker, so they will be just like the others, but they will need assistance. So with these patterns, with this basis, we as women within the community, we try to create this classification, well, to avoid these classifications. But we need to avoid them because there are many types of racism or classism or discrimination, or based on your studies or your background or your economic power or how interesting you are when you explain things. So as a community of women, we want to have a voice within the community of the church and the community of the world. I don't know if I'm speaking too long, so tell me about the time. How can we be a woman within the church? I was talking to this about this. I wasn't a feminist. I didn't need to be a feminist before joining the church, but since I am in part of the church, I need to be feminist because otherwise I'm not listened to. I am not heard. All these paternalistic and patronizing gestures that men do in church towards women. So we're doing this more awareness-raising work, and we need to acknowledge as I said earlier, we need to acknowledge our own subjectivity. We need to acknowledge our own dignity, individuality. And I agree with Laia that there's no individualistic spirituality, because if this is individualistic, it means it's only pseudo-spirituality. Because if you go through the process of accepting yourself, the very profound self is a relational being. So if I accept myself, I will necessarily create a community. And this is what we want to do. This is part of what we want to do. In the way we relate to each other, we want to help each other and to make people faithful to each other, so that everyone can share their own uniqueness. And as individual nuns in church, we want to live with full conscience and full love. And the church as an institution, and many other institutions as well in civil society, don't usually respect the subjectivity of individuals. They often do not respect the subjectivity of individuals, so I need to be aware that I need to respect my own freedom in order to offer and share who I am as a woman, as a human being. Thank you. It is funny because sometimes people have the idea that women, as you have said, people who are believers or who follow a specific tradition, may be passive and extremely conservative. And the idea is that sometimes someone who is religious, at least that is the idea that I have, well, they have not matured enough. And we are seeing that this has nothing to do with religion, not at all. So with this idea of having this sense of community, you talked about your own community, your own spiritual community, but with this idea of a global community and society at large, there's also a process of transformation that your faith is leading you to experience. For instance, Laia, you started talking about this, and it's obvious that your own spirituality has turned you into an active agent in changing society beyond your own spiritual community, and you have done that through the Centre Obert Eura for the homeless, or the Terra Franca Association, which is devoted to giving giving access to the land, to the soil. You have told us a little bit about that, but tell us more. Thanks to your spirituality, what have you been able to change? What process of transformation are you currently experiencing in social terms? I can't separate spirituality from commitment. I understand life as a whole, so I would not be able to say if spirituality drove me to compromise or to this commitment, or the other way around, because all is part of myself and nothing forces me to do nothing. We have incorporated the Christian or the Western mandate of doing good. We must do good. To give you an example, when somebody came to become a volunteer for our center, Eura, you ask them, why are you coming? And the person would say, I need to do something for others. I need to do something for other people. And sometimes it was difficult to understand what that person meant. And I always told them, this is not the right time. When you feel that you must do something for others, come back, because if you're only feeling that you have this obligation, then you won't last long here. So there's no spirituality without commitment. There's no commitment without spirituality. That's very clear, as you said that. Spirituality needs to be embodied somehow. I am very spiritual and I'm up there hanging somewhere. No, spirituality has to be transformed into a commitment. And both things come together. Both coexist within the person, and there's a feedback loop between them. They appear from the expectation of this embodiment, the expectation of an answer. I love this song by Charango. Living means taking a stance. It means that you have to reveal yourself from your inner self, and you want to rebel in action. For me, spirituality doesn't make any sense unless you embody it somehow. If you need to land this spirituality. At the origin of every social project in which I was involved, there was always an appeal to find an answer, an appeal to do something. I was convinced that I had to bring my own contribution, the taint of color that I could offer to the project. And here I feel very identified, and I always love to talk about the hummingbird. There's a legend about the hummingbird. All animals started racing because there was there was a fire, and the hummingbird went and tried to fetch some water from the river to try and put off the fire. And the animals told him, "Are you crazy? Do you think that you're going to put out the fire like this?" And the hummingbird said, "No, of course not, but I am just doing my bit." So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing my bit, and I will continue to do so as long as as long as I can. And whatever my journey is, it is clear that I will always be affected to what happens to others, and I will always be in pain thinking about those who slip out homeless, and I will be concerned by the drownings and the fleeing and the wars. Although this pain does not block me, because very often people are blocked. Oh, there's so much going on, I don't know what to do. Okay, it doesn't block me. It makes me feel stubborn and full of hope, and it gives me strength to do my bit, to try and help all of us to live a little bit better, just a tiny bit, a tiny bit better than the way we live at the moment. Thank you so much. Maria del Mar. I am talking to them because Maria del Mar, okay, it is true, my name is Maria del Mar, but I'm also Mother Abbess, and what can I do? How should I address you? Because it is difficult to tell you Mother Abbess. And I thought that's the way it had to be. And Maria del Mar told me, no, that's your problem, basically. You should address me as Maria del Mar, if you wish so. Well, let me tell you, Joan Struck is one of my teachers. He's a sociologist, a big sociologist who has studied religion, and he always said that we should look at the life that is led in monasteries and convents, because life within a monastery is like a lighthouse for those who live outside of the monasteries. And this is something that I think about often, and I think he's very right in the sense that we can learn a lot about how monasteries are organized, how dialogue takes place. If you're not familiar with monasteries, you might think that it's full of men or women, depending on that they are all alike, that they're all very similar. And as you said, Maria del Mar, they ended up there, poor people, because they didn't have other options. But when you get to know them, you realize that it's just the opposite. And in monasteries, there are people with different mentalities, different ways of doing, different ways of looking at life, and that makes you be constantly attentive, listening actively to what they say, even in those spaces of silence. And I think that there's also an effort so that there is no abuse of power. And I always think, yes, well, Joan Struck is right, because there's a lot to be learned from monasteries by us who are living outside. Maria del Mar, as being part of a religious community, are you also agents for change outside the church and outside your religious community as well? How do you feel about that? Well, I think I am full of faith. I think that the monastery tradition is very wise, that we experience that or not. Well, we do what we can. Not only people outside need to learn, we need to learn ourselves. An abbot says, an abbot I know said that Jesus came here because he was like the doctor for people, and those who are at the monasteries are in the intensive care units somehow. So it's true, we might be wise, but we need to learn a lot. Those who are outside of the monasteries and those who are in the monasteries. So there's a draw here. I wish monasteries could be a lighthouse or a light. I will tell you about an image. I will tell you about the stars. I remember that I was told how stars create light, because they merge their atoms. The stars need to generate energy. Nuclear energy is the fission, and it's the separation of atoms, and stars are the fusion of atoms, and they create energy and light. And this light comes to the earth many, many years later. So I imagine a star up there in the sky, because I mean, merging atoms is not funny. It means that you have to take all these parts that you have within yourself, and you have to put them all together, instead of saying, well, this part I don't like, I need to eliminate, you have to integrate everything, and very often there's no light. But this star that was up there in the sky looked outside instead of working, said, okay, look at that star, it's shining so much light. But while it was looking at the star, the other star, it was losing its own light, because it was not working hard to create that light. So I wish communities would acknowledge all of us, would acknowledge all the atoms, all the members of the community. And if we are able to relate in as much as we can, if we are able to create links between us, well, I hope that this would create an energy that somewhere, at some point in history, could become light for others. However, the monastic tradition, has a starting point. It can become a light for someone if you do your own work first. The monastic tradition has evangelized, of course. There have been many monks and nuns that went and preached with a sword in the name of God. But the monastic tradition has to do with a personal conversion, a personal transformation. And this process of transformation is a process of learning to be at this moment in time, understanding that every moment is inhabited by God. Monastic life believes that those who are inside and those who are outside, because there are monks and nuns inside the monastery, and also those many that are who are outside, we do this learning process, and we open up to a reality that goes beyond ourselves, that loves us, accepts us, and values us, and allows us to give the best of what we are. And if we do that on a personal level and also on a community level, maybe we might shine a light and we might hopefully contribute to the transformation of the world. And as Laia said, this is then turned into something specific. This is not something that I do internally. This has practical consequences. And these practical consequences then are turned into something like, well, welcoming people. It needs to make it possible for people to come and spend 1 day, 2 days, 3 days to turn this place into a home so that that person can feel they are at home or he or she is at home, and then that they can move on. And then there's also the factor of education. We need to offer an education that is human, bodily, that takes into account our own body and that takes into account our own psychology as well as our spiritual and dimension and our intelligence too, because this spiritual process is an intelligent process, it's an embodied process, and it's also a collective process, and that's what we would like to communicate based on these dimensions. Besides the specific commitment, Regina is here and she's doing collaborations, for instance, in prisons and offering support, for instance, at the Gregoire, or the income for this community, of our community, that is always devoted to collaborations with third parties and institutions, this specific, real social collaboration. Thank you. Jenabou, in your case, you being part of a minority religious community and you being from a minority ethnic background and of African descent, so everything is minority based, to what extent do you believe that minority groups such as yours can change society? What tools do you use for this transformation, and to what extent would you say that this transformation process becomes real thanks to your actions? As you well said, the fact of being a woman and being Muslim and black makes us aware. I have a pain in the neck about discrimination. I'm really sorry, but I am a sociologist. Actually, we are very much aware. Let me say, well, Islam is rooted in Spain, but Islam is a minority religion. Besides us, as part of the Muslim communities, because I prefer to speak in the plural and not in the singular, we have Muslim communities of African descent who've had their role in this. And I am especially linked to the communities that I work with, Umbrales Umma and Diabi soninké. They are working to offer support because a large part of the Gambian communities who are, for instance, in irregular situations, we offer them support. We're also part of the campaigns to get, well, papers for the illegal immigrants. We also work in awareness raising, offering talks, working on the social media. Not much is said about them, but they are really strong and powerful. They generate virtual communities, and there are many communities of young religious people in the social media who get together and create communities. So let's not take that lightly. And also in the social media, we generate interreligious dialogues with other communities, non-Muslim communities. especially with animist religions and Abya community religions, those communities from Latin America, indigenous Latin American communities. And within our communities, we also build bridges because sometimes the ethnic factor, let's put it that way, cuts bridges between different communities, different Muslim communities who live in the same areas. And Umbrales Umma builds this kind of bridges. We organize gatherings and we offer community support. For instance, in cases of gender violence or with everything that happens in the fences and so on. And part of our colleagues who are in Umbrales Umma and Diabi soninké are journalists, and they're also scholars, and they do scientific education, they do awareness raising, and it is important for the Senegal and Gambian communities to do some, awareness raising and scientific campaigns to inform about what's really going on. Thank you. Yes, and acting as a star, as a lighthouse yourselves as well. Thank you. And to conclude, just a final question. Within this process, which is an inner transformation journey, but also a social and a community transformation, have you had any role model, any woman that was an inspiration for you, that was someone you looked up to and guided you in your path? Maybe Maria del Mar could start with that. Either I have many or I don't have any models. You're asking me this question, and Saint Teresa from Avila is a good model. Angela Volpini, Aitin Sun, the nuns, when I joined the monastery, they were also a good model for me. Whenever I see someone who's able to be faithful to himself or herself, to listen to themselves and to share them what they are, and that's not easy because usually your environment offers some resistance. When I see people who live like that, they immediately become a model for me, and they are highly stimulating, and they help me move on in my own journey. What about you, Laia? Let me give you one. Let's be specific. As you talked about Angela Volpini, very often I think about her. I don't know if you know this name. She was a Christian, she was a Catholic. She had some appearances of Virgin Mary in the 1940s, and she has written a lot. We could talk about many people, but she's still alive. And I was told, if you get to meet Angela Volpini, either you become Catholic 100% or you will stop believing. And I thought, okay, well, maybe we can find some middle ground, but really, it's not that I believed so much. Well, but you know what I mean. She opened a new awareness. There was an interview with Teresa Forcada and Angela, and then a book was published about that interview. Well, she opens a new awareness in my journey, and she led me to believe that, or to feel that I was in an infinite creative process, in an inspiring and nurturing spiral. a spiral that would make me feel more responsible, made up by all of us. It discovers endless possibilities in my language. That's something that you said, Maria del Mar, and she invites me to self-realization, co-creation, and what's most important and most difficult, as you said, she gives me the freedom to be really who I am, to be free. To become who you are means that you are free and also responsible, and we should talk about freedom too. Yeah, that's going to be for the next talk. Jenabou, you talked about Aisha. I don't know if you want to talk about any other woman or any other person who was a model for you. I agree with them. I have so many models. I could draw up a huge list, but I would like to mention a few. Amina Wadud, I don't know if you know her. She was the first Imam woman. She presided over a Friday prayer, and she was rather controversial within Muslim communities because she included also LGBTI communities and well, Amina Wadud is one of my models. Amina Mama is another model. She's a sociologist, and she became my benchmark not only in religious aspects but also in sociology. She has done sociology studies. She has studied religions. She's from Nigeria. Maria Maba. Maria Maba is a poet and philologist from Senegal. Fatou Sow, she's a sociologist. Who else? And my cousin, my mother. My mother is a great role model, and she's always there. My grandmother. Women in my family. They were also big reference or big models for me. I don't know if I should continue or if that's enough. Thank you very much, Jenabou. Your mother. I don't know. I don't think we have. I don't think we have anything written about it. But I think we should interview her someday. But I think that there was an interview to Amina Wadou because she was in Barcelona not long ago, and we published it. It was just published in Dialogal, and it's free. Access for that interview is free. So if you want to check her out, Amina Wadud will be found in Dialogal. I would like to thank the three of you for having told us so much, for having shared so many things with us. I'm sure we will need a little bit of time to digest them and analyze them. And I hope that after having heard you, I hope that nobody else will say that religious women are acritical and all these things that are often heard. I think that by listening to you, it is unavoidable to see that here we have three women who are big role models. They are leaders, and they can become a model, an example for many other women. And if I sum up what I feel, I realize that you're paying a lot of importance to subjectivity. And I believe that what you're actually talking about is the need to listen to yourself, to listen your subjectivity, and also to be able to listen to others, to embrace them as they are. And talking about inner transformation and transformation of the world, I think this is the key. We need to be able to listen to ourselves and to listen to others and to make room for them without invading them. So let me thank you. That's the only word that comes to mind. Thank you, because we've learned so much just by listening to you. And if anyone would in the room would like to share their own thoughts or ask questions, taking advantage that we have here Maria del Mar, Laia, and Jenabou, Yolanda has a roving microphone, and if anyone would like to make their comments, she will come to you with the microphone. There was someone translating, right? My apologies to the translator, because I thought that I would speak slowly so that people can translate properly, but no problem. No problem. The interpreter is grateful for your thoughts.
Si ningú...
I don't know, maybe you would like to share some closing thoughts, something that you thought was important? I would like to thank your comments because they were fabulous. Let me also mention someone from Manresa, and I believe that we should probably think about this person, because that person has been silenced, and right now it's Angela Prat from Manresa. She lived in the 15th century, and she lived at the same time as Saint Ignatius. And we have praised Saint Ignatius so much, but Angela has been silenced by the Vatican in the Vatican archives. She was a nun, the founder of the Capuchin nuns, but she was married and she had daughters. So what happened? This is not correct. And whenever there was a process, every time that there was a possibility or an attempt to raise her profile, she was silenced. She even wrote to Saint Teresa. She was a great mystic. She was someone with a fantastic spirituality, and she had actions with women in Manresa, and women with economic and social problems, but she was never vindicated. And I would like to put her name up because in recent times I've had a very close relationship with a community of nuns in Manresa who are despised and marginalized, and I think that it's not so much a question of gender, but rather a question of power. And I believe that here we all, men and women, need to work together to work against these power struggles that silence so many people, and people such as Angela that I would like to raise the profile of. I think it is fantastic what all you have said, but there are many people around here who have been silenced so much. And now that we have been celebrating Saint Ignatius, it would also be a good time to celebrate this woman who had a huge spiritual and religious value, but who has been left on the sidelines of history. Thank you so much for this contribution. Yes, you mentioned something that is really important for me. Power. In my church, sexual abuse is an issue, but also spiritual abuse is an issue, because as is spiritual abuse can be really harmful, because the spiritual dimension of the person is the most sacred and intimate part of them. And any religious tradition, when they replace your ability to get in touch with the transcendence, this is something that can be actually reported, that can be actually denounced, because a lot of harm has been done from many religious traditions, probably out of good intentions, but it is so easy to harm. I'm talking about my own religion, at least. My own religion says that we are all the sons and daughters of God. We're all brothers and sisters. And religion is the only role of religion is this, to remind us all that everyone is a son or daughter of God, and that we need to listen to this spirituality and to embody it and to turn it into something useful. But the same institution tells you, well, don't worry, I'll tell you what is good and what is bad. I'll tell you whether you need to speak up or you need to shut up. So the institution is giving you power, but it's also removing the power from you. So we need to be very careful, and people need to be very careful about not treading this ground, because very often people give you this road, and we need to take up the space that we need to. And Angela Volpini is essential in that. But our examples, our role models should never replace our own ability to respond to the transcendence and to the world. Yes, and there are also strong power relationships between women, of course. Yes, we need to be very aware of that. We need to put our focus on that too. Anyone else who would like to participate? Maybe it's time for dinner? Microphone, please. Okay, so maybe it's time to bring this dialogue to a close. I would like to thank the three of you and to thank all the audience for having come. Thank you.